I'm Paula Al-Anon.
Hey, Paula.
I'm going to read the meeting introduction for Al-Anon. We welcome you and hope to the Al-Anon meeting. We welcome you and hope you will find in this fellowship the help and friendship we have been privileged to enjoy. We who live or have lived with the problem of alcoholism understand, as perhaps few others can. We too were lonely and frustrated. But in Al-Anon, we discover that no situation is really hopeless and that it is possible for us to find contentment, even happiness, whether the alcoholic is still drinking or not. We urge you to try our program. It has helped many of us find solutions that lead to serenity. So much depends on our own attitudes, and as we learn to place our problem in its true perspective, we find it loses its power to dominate our thoughts and live. The family situation is bound to improve as we apply the Al-Anon ideas. Without spiritual help, living with an alcoholic is too much for most of us. Our thinking becomes distorted by trying to force solutions, and we become irritable and unreasonable without knowing it. And at this time, I'd like to read the daily reflection. This comes from One Day at a Time in Al-Anon. A compulsive drinker can never be set free from his sickness by treating him with contempt. Yet isn't that what many of us do? When the drinker's dignity and quality are hidden under sodden incoherence or violence, it isn't easy to remember that this helpless creature is a child of God, hurt, sensitive, sick with guilt, in need of our compassion. Difficult as it is, our own progress must begin with correcting our attitudes toward the alcoholic when he or she is in the acute stages of the illness. Emotional crises happen too, after the alcoholic has become sober. We owe it to ourselves to meet these in the same way as though actual drinking had caused the disturbance. Nothing constructive results from meeting anger with anger. Nobody wins the battle in which control is lost. Today's reminder: quiet pose can be acquired, and it does have a decided effect on the drinker, who even in an alcoholic fog senses a change in us. But even more important, relaxing saves wear and tear on our emotions and preserves our own dignity. And the quote: "Let me turn my thoughts away from the torments of the troublesome moment and think of your ever-present help and support." Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
I'm Marsha, I'm alcoholic. And I don't even know if this is legal for an alcoholic to introduce an Al-Anon, but St. Paula said it was okay, so we're going to do it. So I have the pleasure of introducing your next speaker, Laura W. We met her when we went out to Sydney for a Red Robin, and then I got to know her a little bit better in the bar last night. And then, so she's a hoot, and just welcome, Laura.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Gotta make sure that's in the right spot. Because, you know, Al-Anoners, we control each other. All right, so yes, I am Laura. I'm very, very grateful Al-Anoner. And who would have ever thought that we would say we were grateful to be in the program? But I am here to say that it has definitely saved my life and certainly has saved my qualifier's life, for sure.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. Hi, Laura.
Yeah. And what a act to follow. Goodness. Deb was fantastic. So, okay, so it's also interesting that she doesn't know it yet, but, you know, I think she only lives grew up about 30 miles from me because I'm from Bridgeport, Nebraska. She said Greeley. Oh, Greeley. Never mind. I thought it was Gurley. And I thought, wow, that's really, really close to me. Okay, well, never mind. Anyway, so I grew up in a small town, just 1,600 people. Lucky number 7 of 8 children. And we didn't grow up with a lot, but my dad ended up leaving when I was in 4th grade. And, you know, that just made us different because, you know, you just don't have the family that you think that you'd have. And yeah, and so that makes you different. And so that made me determined to make sure that I had a perfect life. Anybody have a perfect life here? Yeah, well, it didn't turn out perfect. But I was good at sports in school, and so I wasn't the most popular kid in my class, but I had a lot of friends. I was in the popular group, but as a freshman in high school, I was beating everybody else in athletics, and that just put a black mark on my back, because it's like, oh my gosh, you can't beat the upperclassmen. That's just not right. Well, I did, and they didn't like it, and so that kind of put a black mark on my back, and I was just a good girl, and that in itself sometimes puts a black mark or a black target on your back too. But you still just do the best that you can do in any situation. But my golly, I was determined to have the perfect life, the perfect Brady Bunch sort of happiness, and it doesn't always turn out the way you think it's going to be. So I ended up one night on I think it was a Friday night. Anyway, my sister needed a haircut, and so I was cutting her hair, and the doorbell rang, and it was her boyfriend who had just surprised her and stopped by. And since I was cutting her hair, he had to come in and just wait. So then when they went to leave, he asked me if I wanted to ride along, because after all, he was with a friend. And so I walk out of the house, and my qualifier, Mark, he hops out of his car and says, "Hey, Ryan, old buddy, old pal, you got me a date. You're not so bad after all." And so anyway, I ended up sort of dating him through my senior year, and just kept dating, and we're still together, so miracles do happen. They really do. Just wait for the story. Yeah. So we started dating, and I was, like I said, I was determined to get a clean cut guy and have this perfect life. Well, I think it was the homecoming dance in my senior year that he brought some wine along with him. And I am still shocked to this day that I was tipsy at my high school dance, that I thought, nobody does that. But then he was pointing out to me that this person's high and this person's high. It's like, what are you talking about? I mean, I was oblivious to any of it. I mean, I didn't know that stuff really happened. Yeah, drinking and that sort of stuff, but what are you talking about? And so that was quite the eye-opener for me. But we had a good time. I mean, he really didn't drink all that often, and I thought it was just fine. And so we dated through college as well. I mean, he went one direction. He was a year ahead of me, so he was going to school while I was a senior, and then I went and played volleyball and basketball in college fairly locally, and so we dated through that. And I didn't drink then at all, really, and I think I got drunk one time, and I woke up with a headache. Well, because he gave me a false ID, of course, so I could go into a bar with him. That's what gay people do, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so I got drunk, or I got sick enough to throw up and had a headache the next day, and I was like, well, that's stupid. And thankfully for me, I didn't have that trigger that it just keeps continuing, so I was fine with it. I didn't have to ever get drunk again, because once was enough for me, thank God. But anyway, and so then when we got married, gosh, we didn't have any money, so we drank lemonade and Kool-Aid. Do you guys, anybody even know what that is anymore. But yeah, we had Kool-Aid, lemonade, iced tea, and water, because we couldn't even afford pop. And besides, he drank Coca-Cola, and I did not like Coca-Cola. So I was a Pepsi person. And once they changed the formula in Coca-Cola, he protested Coca-Cola and changed to Pepsi. It's like, oh, I like Pepsi. We can afford Pepsi. So, I mean, I thought it was crazy that he would drive, that he would, buy a 6-pack of Pepsi and that would last a week. But, that quickly changed. But anyway, so over the years, we started having kids, and I ended up switching jobs a couple different times. And then we started meeting up with the owners of the company that I was working at. We would meet up at one of their lakes because we were big in water skiing. And we would water ski during the week because, not as many people would be at the lake as on the weekends. So we would water ski during the weeks or weeknights. And but then when I switched this job, the owners of that company had a lake that they always got together on the weekends on Sunday afternoons and water skied. Well, they were big in drinking, and Mark had his own heating and cooling business that he had started because when he was working for the other one, they were starting to tell him what he should or what he could and couldn't do, and he's like, no, I'm just going to get my own job and own business, and that way I'll be my own boss. But we started going out water skiing on Sunday afternoons with these other people, and he just really enjoyed drinking with them. But this story, me telling my story I'm not going to tell his story. I'm just going to tell you how it kind of led up to that. But but he would be drinking or partying on the weekends, and that was difficult. But especially raising kids, we had 3 kids. And we went and we did, like the Dave Ramsey, trying to get out of debt and that sort of stuff. And they say, well, one person makes the budget, and then they share it with the other person, and then you come together and you communicate. Let's communicate. Well, and at that particular time, I'll never forget that I told him, I said, okay, we have $35 until payday. So what does a good AA person do is you go out and you buy $25 worth of alcohol. And it made sense to him, evidently. But, so I think that truly was the last budget thing that I had ever done, because it's like, well, this is ridiculous. It's not going to work. But so, and it didn't matter if I would measure the bottles or throw out the bottles or hide the bottles or any of that, because after all, we try to control, Al-Anoners, we try to control because, of course, that's going to help, right? And, one time I thought he was having ice water, and I took a sip of it and about spit it out, because it was not ice water. It was, I think, as he calls it, vodka tonic. Or Totkavonic, that's what it was. A Totkavonic is what he called it. But anyway, so I changed it to ice water, and he took one sip, and it went flying across the room. So, so that just doesn't work. When you try to control and change, nothing works. And, I mentioned that my dad had left when I was in 4th grade, and I was just sure that I was not going to have to go through that. My mom raised us, I'm number 7 of 8 kids, and she raised the last 4 kids on her own. And so I was just determined to be different. And one of my regrets is one night I told my mom I was going to go to Baird to see him, and she says, well, why don't you just stay home with me? I said, well, because I want to go be with a real family, with a mom and a dad, and I want to be with a real family. And she says, oh, honey, we are a family. And that is probably one of my biggest regrets because, we really were a family. She would stay up and we played board games, we played cards, did puzzles. And, we had family time. And when, growing up later on in a family that you end up with sitting and watching somebody drink one after another, and there really isn't the unity because, he said that his brother ruined things and changed the rules of the game, so he didn't like to play games with us. And, it didn't really feel like family, because he was over here and the rest of us were over here. A lot of times I'd be in the kitchen with the kids anyway, and that's okay. And just so you know, we have communicated, so it's not like I'm going to get in trouble and he's going to come after me afterwards because he's going to speak next. So don't be worried. Yeah. That's my disclaimer, and he's hearing it now too, so that comes true. But anyway, it was just very, very difficult. And, but, with mom raising us 4 kids on our own, it really was no different because I was in the kitchen raising the kids on our own. Or, he was in the living room drinking or watching TV or whatever. And I was, doing homework, reading stories, whatever, so really it wasn't any different. And so sometimes, they say, and I didn't want to repeat history. I didn't want to go through a divorce and repeat history. I heard a song one time, and I used to think that it was the most stupidest song because it says, it was just repeating the generation and generation and generation and generations, and then like repeating things over and over and over again. I can't remember what the song was and even the words, but one day in church, all of a sudden I saw that verse that it talked about the generations and the generations. It's like, oh, that's what that song is. So I really definitely don't want to repeat history and have another generation of another divorce or another divorce or another divorce. So I was determined not to be in one of those situations. I struggled with that for a long, long, long time, actually, thinking I can't leave because I didn't want to repeat history. And then I always wondered, because I didn't like to have to split holidays. I didn't like to have to be forced to go see Dad and his wife, and because it was just like I just don't understand her. Mom's so pretty, and oh, that's right, she had money. The other one had money, and that was just very irritating to me. But so anyway, so we went to school, and I remember, I went to college, and then we got married, had kids, and we had one kid actually, one daughter. And I got a call in the middle of the night saying that my mom had died. And just a week before that, I had an argument with her because my younger sister was going to leave, was struggling with her husband, I'll just say it that way. And I had an argument with Mom. It's like, don't you want her to be happy? And then, so my sister felt guilty about that all happening when they were struggling. And I was like, I just would not want anybody to have to go through that again also. Anyway, so I felt bad about arguing with my mom. And so then there was no leaving after that. It's like maybe it was my fault that, that she was stressed out because I had argued with her. So you just kind of keep going and going and going. And then we had our struggles, and I worked for a software company, and so I would help them configure the program. Whenever somebody would buy this program, I'd help them configure it specifically for their dealership and then train the employees. And so the blessing with that is that I traveled. And when I started doing that program, started doing that job, my sister, younger sister, who'd had that problem, that I had mentioned. Anyway, she came to me and she goes, I just can't believe that, that you're traveling and leaving your kids at home. And the oldest one was like a freshman. It was like, no freshman should have to do their own laundry. It's like, are you kidding me? And she goes, I just can't believe that you're leaving and making them do that. I was like, well, they have a dad, and he's not babysitting, he's fathering, he's being the dad. And so I sat all of 3 kids down and said, tell me, okay, so just tell me, do you think that this is a bad situation? I am traveling and, yes, you're having to do this, but is that a bad situation? And our son said, Mom, isn't it a parent's responsibility to train them to be self-sufficient? I said, thank you. Yes, okay. And yes, I felt horrible because I knew he was drinking, but yet a mile down the road, I felt freedom. I just like, okay, I don't have to live with it every day. And so I could be me and get out and get amongst people and be free from it. I just didn't have to be around it all the time. But I'm sure that a lot of you guys can relate to, then you start playing this mind game of comparing your insides with other people's outsides. And so you would see these couples and you'd see them holding hands, or you'd see them actually talking at a restaurant instead of just sitting there staring at each other or staring off. And you think, oh man, I would love to have that relationship, or I'd love to have that relationship. And, getting out of town was so free for me. At least I could live in my imagination and think, I could be like that couple or like that couple. And so that was, it just gave me some peace. Well, one time, and I always traveled by myself to do this, but one time there was a company out in California that was quite large. It's still our largest company. I've been working with this company for 27 years now, and that is still the largest company that there is. Well, excuse me, the owner of the company, my boss at that time, says, Laura, I think that I need to just go with you. I said, oh darn, I think so. And she said that we had to go out. And the first time, I always did the analyzing of what the company needed before I went out, and just over the telephone. And so I would interview them and find out, how many stores they had, how many employees they had, what product they sold, and this program, whether they sold tractors or lawnmowers or golf cars or whatever, if they sold a product, sold parts, sold service, and needed all the financial reports to go with it, then the program is a complete dealership management system. And me knowing accounting as well, it just worked out really well. And so, but I would interview them on the phone, and this time, this company was so large, Ann says, I think that we need to do an on-site interview. Perfect. And I think that we need to stay over the weekend also, and we'll go to the coast and grab a cottage there and then come back and do the next week. I was like, oh darn, I think you're right. But it's just really cool. But and over the years, I would always complain to Ann because of my life at home, and she would say, you you have a job anytime, and I would even help give you a place to get settled in Colorado if you'd want to move to Colorado. Well, tell somebody in Nebraska that they should move to Colorado. Yeah, their heads shaking. No, Mark would not move to Colorado, and I didn't even ask him to, because I knew that what the answer would be. What she just kept saying, there's life better, and you talk to your friends, and everybody wants to tell you what to do, right? They always want, well, you need to do this, you need to tell them to do this, you tell them not to do this, and are you putting up with that? And you just hear this constantly. And especially from your family, and there's certain ones that just really just thought that they knew how to handle it in spite of their own issues at home. But, so Ann was, kind of one of those, you need to get free sort of thing. Well, she happened to be with me out in California when, we were in this big conference room with all these owners and department managers, and my phone started ringing. Like, shut it off real fast. And it rang again. I shut it off real fast. So I could see that it was Mark. Well, he texted me again and said, call as soon as you can. I thought, oh no, what happened? So I excused myself from the meeting, went out, talked to him. He said, and he explained, and you'll hear the rest of the story, but he explained that, well, there was something bad that happened in town. Bad choice was made. And I wanted you to hear it from me instead of somebody else, because small towns if they don't know your business, they'll make it up. So, so darn well that it's going to get back to you really, really fast. So he wanted to make sure that I heard the information straight from the horse's mouth, instead of through my sister or anybody else in town. I said, okay. So then at lunch at that particular dealership, my boss says, well, is everything okay? And I says, oh yeah, I'll just tell you later. And so then after work, we started driving back to the hotel. And the night before, when we got back to the hotel, she'd get on her computer and it's like, okay, let's take this walking path. Because she's all, coming from Colorado, you're out, you're just always outside doing stuff and walking and getting exercise and going. And so we would, okay, let's take this walking path. So that's what we did the first night. Well, the second night was absolutely different, but she followed me into my room. Well, anyway, I got to back up a little bit. We got in the car and she says, okay, now tell me the rest of the story. Now, what exactly happened? And, I told her that a friend had tried to, made a bad choice, and Mark thought he would help her out. Actually thought he would befriend her, and she made a bad choice, and of course that was going to reflect on Mark, and blah, 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 blah. But the more I was telling the story, I started out nice, and then I raised my voice, and then I was yelling. It's like, I can't believe that this is what happened. And so then we got to the hotel, and she followed me in the room and started typing on the computer, and then it's like, what are you looking for? Well, we're going to a meeting. I said, a meeting? She goes, yeah, a meeting. I said, okay. So, but we can go to this Mexican restaurant here first. And so we went to this meeting, and it was called an Al-Anon meeting. And I cried through the whole entire Al-Anon meeting, because it's like, oh my gosh, they're telling my story. You mean there's other people that have to deal with this shit? I'll just say, it's like, you mean I'm not the only one that is, told not to think, or not to feel, or whatever, and you're the crazy one, and on. And so then the next night after work, it's, okay, where are we gonna go? Oh, we can go and have sushi here, and then go to this meeting. And the next night, we can have Italian food, and then we're going to go to this meeting. So we went to 4 meetings in 5 days. And the first 2 meetings, for sure, I cried through the whole entire thing. Because it's like, when you're in a situation where your life is unmanageable, but you're told that you're the sick one, and it's all in your mind, and blah, blah, blah. You begin to think of it. You really begin to believe them, that you are the sick one, and maybe I'm just a putz, or a fuddy-dud, or stick in the mud and don't want to drink, or don't want to party, or whatever. But yeah, 4 meetings in 5 days. And I didn't know those people existed. I didn't know that was life behind closed doors, because after all, they're holding hands and they're smiling, when you see these couples. and you think everything is fine and just your life is screwed up. And so I learned that you could get online and say Al-Anon.com, or I'm sure you could do AA.com, and you can find a meeting in any city, in any state, in any continent, or whatever. Even in the ocean, because when you're on a cruise ship, they'll say, Bill W's meeting at 1 o'clock on this place. So listen, because it really, it's there, it's out there. There's people like us. But anyway, so I came home and I found out that there was a meeting just 35 minutes from our house, and I had no idea. So I figured I grew up enough to travel on my own. I could grow up. I was old enough to go to a meeting by myself. So I found the address, walked into this old church, an old church, go in the back door and had this skinny little steps to go upstairs to a meeting, and I start hearing, oh, it's so great to see you, and I will see you next week. And I thought, what? And so I get up there, I said, is this the Al-Anon meeting? And I said, yeah, but it started at 7. It's like, well, the internet said that it was 8. And it was like 5 till 8. And immediately, one lady says, don't worry about it. I'm not in a hurry. I can stay and visit with you. And another gentleman said the same thing. And, somebody said it's not a coincidence. It's called God incidences. Because that's exactly what I needed. I needed an individual meeting to cry, to scream, to yell, to blame, whatever I needed to do. I just needed to get it out. I am speaking today because thank you, Marcia, but if you have not spoken or shared your story, I'll tell you that it is freeing. If you don't get it out, it's like like a sticker festering. It's poisoning. And so the more that you share, every single time I tell a story, it's a different story. And somebody asked me this past week, he said, well, do you know what you're going to say? It's like, no, God just opens my mouth, and it just comes out because you really honestly don't know what you need to say. I started today completely different than I ever have. Because you just open your mouth and you get up here as a service to everybody else, and God takes care of it. My higher power will always be God. Anyway, so I went up to that meeting, and they, they listened, they hugged, they said, keep coming back. And it really, when they say keep coming back, you do need to go back. And they say, go to so many meetings in the first 30 days or whatever the case is. Listen to them because they know what they're talking about. And so I kept coming back, but it was kind of funny because I'd get home and he'd say, did they tell you that you're the victim, again? I was like, no. I was like, well, what did you talk about me this time? No, didn't, because you learn, just like somebody mentioned, or I know somebody always says, I'm going to go to this meeting and learn how to drink. It's like, I'm going to go to the meeting, and in our case, I'm going to go to the meeting and learn how to tell them not to drink, and that doesn't work either, right? And I, the lady that stayed that night became my sponsor right away. And it's just funny because she would say, I would say, oh, he did this, and he did this, and he did this. And she'd kind of listen, and then she'd say, okay, so now tell me something about your day without mentioning his name. It's like, what? But it's his fault. No, just, you don't have control over him. You only have control over yourself. Only what is in your little hula hoop. So let's talk about you. It's like, what do you mean talk about me? It's his fault. And I have some friends in both programs, and actually the guy that does my hair, he's in both programs, but he says, the AA got him sober, but the Al-Anon taught him how to live. And because not only do you have to live with the people around you, you have to live with yourself. Whether you're an Al-Anoner or an AA, because even Al-Anoners have to tell us, give ourselves a talking to, right? But anyway, so I would come home and I'd get these looks and like, what did you say? What da 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 da. And my sponsor would say, focus on you. You didn't cause it. You can't control it. You can't cure it. So stop trying. What was really interesting when my boss took me to that meeting, first of all, I didn't even know she was going to a meeting. I knew that there was a family problem. I had no idea what had happened. I just knew that she was off the radar for a good week or two. Being a company owner, she had realized that she couldn't control her situation in her family either. And that's hard, when you control people around you for so long and then you realize that you really truly have no control over anybody else other than yourself. It's a hard thing to come to grips with, I guess. And so anyway, my sponsor was just really, really trying to, you have to focus on you. You can't control, and the reason why I guess I mentioned that my boss again is that it was amazing how her attitude had changed also, because once she learned the program, she stopped telling me to leave, because she helped me realize, it's like, you think you're going to control him? He's not you. I was like, what do you mean he's not? He is not you. Do you want him to control you? Why should you be able to control him? Interesting concept. And I'm not sure if the AA program deals as much with slogans as the Al-Anon does, but we've had slogan meetings even, because the business that I was in, I would travel all over, and at the time the company was in Colorado, like I mentioned. And so every time I would go over there, we would try to go to a meeting. And there kind of became a regular meeting over there, but it just so happened that the night that I would go was always over slogans, And but one of the slogans was live and let live. It's like, okay, you can't control them, so you just got to let them live. They can live, they can make their own choices. But they don't get it, nor I, none of us. We can make our own choices, but nobody gets to choose their consequences. So whether it's a good choice, you're going to have good results or good consequences. But you make stupid, bad choices, you're going to pay the consequences. And so it's like, fine, okay, I've got to just let them live. Just let them live. But it took quite a few years even after that I had to remind myself that I had to live also. And so, if you can't control others and you can only control yourself, the Al-Anon program really helps you understand the importance of taking care of yourself. And it's not controlling others, but it's making good choices. And sometimes it's hard boundaries that you have to make choice also, not to control. It's like, you can't do this. You can, we could say, well, you can choose what you want, but if this is your choice, then I'm going to, not sit in the living room with you. I'm not going to sit and watch you drink. You can drink all you want, but if that's what you choose, I'm going to be in the kitchen. And, just simple things like that. You're not controlling, but you're just setting boundaries. Setting boundaries with results, I guess. I don't know. But it was hard. It was really, really hard for me to do that and to even think about it, for that matter. And the other thing that another thing that we'd always say, it was not necessarily a slogan, but I always thought it was funny, is like, when they do go off the edge and make bad choices and have consequences, it's like, that's their problem. And we don't have to buy a ticket to the circus, because then we become the monkeys and, it can be a real circus. Right? But working the program, it really does work. And I will never forget one time when I came home from a meeting and they said, you can't control them and there's no sense in arguing with them either, especially after they're drinking, It says, don't argue with a fool, but imagine arguing with a drunk fool. That makes it even worse, right? So when I came home from the meeting, and he was usually coming back with some sort of comment about, what did they teach you today about me? I can vividly see myself stopping at the doorway, coming in the hallway, and stopping at the doorway to the living room before going on to the kitchen. And he made some wisecrack and remark, and I just said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to argue with you tonight. And I just kept walking. Well, Al-Anon people, I mentioned, we kind of like to try to control things. We can't, but we can try to control. So I don't know how many people have checked cell phones. I'm sure it's not just me. But so after I had done that episode, I happened to check his cell phone, and he had been chatting with different friends, and it said, I don't know what she's up to. She didn't fight with me tonight. It drove him crazy because I was nice. You can kill him with kindness. But I was nice. I just chose not to argue, because what was it going to gain? I was not going to gain anything whatsoever. And, all of our, bless your heart for not having any arguments, and discussions. I'm amazed because we got into some pretty good arguments. And I think mainly it's just because I wasn't given the respect of having an opinion. Because if I didn't have his opinion, it was a wrong opinion. And, but anyway, yeah, I was like, I don't know what was wrong, because she's not fighting with me tonight. And then there was another time, later in our life that I was going to leave, and you would say, how long? He was texting somebody today. How long do I have to be nice anyway? It's like, oh, for Pete's sake. But my mom used to say, what you don't know, what you don't know won't hurt you. So as hard as it was, I did have to stop touching the phone, because what good was it going to do? It just was not going to do any good whatsoever, because I could not control him anyway. But I could control me. I heard attitude earlier. Attitude of gratitude was a big eye-opener for me, because in spite of how bad a relationship is, there really is something every day that you can be grateful for. And in spite of all of the years of him drinking, he always got up and busted his butt. He always worked. And he really could fix anything. I call him my walking encyclopedia. But, and he, so I had to start seeing him from God's eyes and stop judging him, because I couldn't control him, so I judge him either, And did I want him to judge me? So, but I did have to learn to live. The live and let live. I had to learn to live. I said, I don't care if you sit and do this, but I'm not going to sit here and watch you. I'm not going to, if you don't want to go with me, I'm going to stop asking. If you don't want a relationship as a friendship, I'll just quit asking. So I took our youngest daughter to Hawaii. Unfortunately, that was when he was still drinking, and it wasn't all that pleasant. But I booked it before I told him. I wouldn't advise that. Yeah. So then last year I took our oldest daughter to London and I was in the Eiffel Tower on my birthday. And he was sober. And I told him before I booked it. And it went over a lot better. But, you know, I mean, if he didn't want to travel, that's okay. You know, but I'm going to still do it. And, but it was thankfully he was sober. So, and now that I'll tell you how it became, you know, get to the point of being sober. So I said I was going to those meetings on Monday night. And so like any good Al-Anoner, you hide your material, right? So I went to the meetings on Monday and I'd come home and I'd make sure I'd put everything away. So I had, Tuesday came around and he does heating and cooling business. And one of his customers stopped by our house. And Mark wasn't home at the moment, and so I just invited him in, and we'd known him for years, invited him in and give him some water while I waited for Mark. And this guy saw my books. It's like, oh no. And he saw my books on the table, and he said, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a personal question. And I thought, oh great, okay, well sure. He says, well, tell me about these books. And I was like, oh, well, you know, another good Al-Anoner, we make excuses, right? So, they don't drink much. And, you know, you make excuses why they're tired and they couldn't join an event or come to a family event. They just didn't feel good. And, you know, you always make excuses. Well, I made excuses really quickly for those books that were on my on my kitchen table. And but he says, well, let me tell you my story. And so he told me how, you know, his story that he was an alcoholic. And this guy just, with tears running down his face, and it's like, oh my gosh. Well, then it's like Mark shows up, and I thought, oh man, I gotta get the heck out of Dodge, because he's gonna be pissed that I left those books there. So I hustled out of the house to go walk downtown to get some bread for lunch or get something, and then I thought, I don't want to go back, because, you know, we can't let anybody else know what our life is like at home, right? And, but I came back and he was okay with it. And that just was amazing. And that was on a Tuesday. And, so then on Friday morning, Mark decided to, you know, this person told him to call him if he ever needed to talk. And so on Friday morning, Mark called this guy and he says, you know, I had an offer to ride to Bridgeport with another coworker, but I said, you know, I think my friend's going to need me, so I think I better drive myself. And so Mark, sure enough, had called him that day. He says, yes, I can come talk to you. And in fact, I even have books in the pickup to give you. And so that's how he ended up getting sober. And yeah, you're going to have quite the story to hear, you know, all of his story. And I'm not going to spoil anything for his story, but, you know, that I was in Al-Anon for 1.5 years before those books were seen. And praise the Lord, that's all I can say. Because, you know, there was a reason I left those books. I didn't intend it, but God used those books to get the help that Mark needed as well. So I'm going to skip past his story, but I mentioned that I did that training, and it took me all over the United States and Canada even, and I could go to meetings anywhere, you know, because I found that original meeting, but as soon as he was sober, he had to work on himself. And I don't know if there's other Al-Anon people in town or in here at all, but I mean, if you're sober, you're an Al-Anon person too, because you have to deal with yourself now, and maybe still other people around in your family or friends. But I would go to meetings. I would think, well, gosh, if or when he would stop drinking, then everything would be fine, right? If is a huge word, and it wasn't fine. In fact, the first 4 months of him being sober were the darkest months of my life. I mean, I wanted to just swerve into a semi, and we were fighting on the way probably to church, because I know we were going that direction. And we were fighting all the way to church, and then we pretended to be a fine couple. But I said, that's a good thing I didn't get or pull in front of that semi like I wanted to. And it's just like, what? I can't even believe that I said that. But it is hard. It is hard. And so I would go to meetings wherever I went. And I'll never forget, I went down in Arkansas. I went into this meeting, and it's like, I thought it would be better if he'd stop. And I am lost. And what was so wonderful is that I could say whatever I needed to say at those meetings, because nobody knew me, just like the majority of you guys. Nobody knows me, so I can say, and that's what's freeing about sharing your story, because you can tell complete strangers and you can get all of the ugliness out and get that poison out and share it with strangers, and they still like you, and you'll never probably see them again. But anyway, down in that Arkansas meeting, I said, I just hate this. It would be hell at night, but at least it'd be joy in the morning when they apologized, and it was just this repeated cycle, but it was joy in the morning. Well, I didn't even have that joy in the morning anymore. It was just emptiness. It was emptiness. But he just explained that he was in this bubble, and he said, but there was two guys at that meeting. He says, hang in there, because he says, I'm at an Al-Anon meeting because I need to learn how to deal with myself. I'm in a bubble that I can't handle anybody else, this person, stranger. I can't handle anybody else in my bubble, in my space, because I don't even know how to live with myself in this new world of being sober. How in the world am I going to deal with anybody else around me, especially a spouse? And a spouse that thinks that we should be able to cure you, help. As a mom, you want to help your kids. You want to help them get better. Try this, do this, And it doesn't work good when you're telling your spouse like a kid, because sometimes he would say, "You're not my mom. Don't treat me like one of the kids." But nurturing, you want to help them. But this guy, and there was two of them, both of them said, give them time. Just give them time, because they have to learn to live in a whole new world without that crutch of alcohol. And so they need the time and the space. So whether I went to Arkansas or Toronto, Canada, or wherever it was, the more meetings you can go to and the more stories that you can hear, it really is healing. And guaranteed you're going to hear something that's going to help you along the way, and I hope that you've helped. I hope that what I've shared has helped. But I'm grateful to say that, we've been married 46 years, and so miracles really do happen. And I'm thankful that my boss took me to those meetings, because, and she also quit telling me to leave. She, one of the things that I really enjoyed her telling me is that, why do you expect him to think the way you think? He is not you. It's just simple, a simple statement, but such a profound statement. It's like, nobody is going to think the same way that we do. Nobody. And, and everybody's going to have different opinions and different thoughts. And I think the easiest thing, or the best thing to learn in the program, is we come to these things so we can listen. And I love the fact that, there's not the crosstalk, so you can't interrupt. And that is huge. And one time when we were first getting, early in the program for both of us, I don't even remember where I heard it, but I just grabbed a spoon and said, "I've got the talking spoon, don't interrupt me." Or then there was other times that I would just come into the living room and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Laura." And that was his sign that he had to keep his mouth shut and I needed to speak. And I just wanted to be heard, you know, and the same boss, we were out in California yet, and the same boss, I was just ranting and raving about it in a restaurant, saying, well, you know, I don't care to be right. It is not important for me to be right. I just want him to realize he's wrong. And she just split a gut laughing, and the whole restaurant went quiet. And everybody turned and looked at us, and it's like, it was just ridiculous. But I mean, I really, honestly, I don't care to be right. I don't need those pats on the back. My love language is not words of affirmation. I don't need that. Now his is, so you have to make sure you thank him when he takes the trash out. But learning the different love languages and stop expecting them to be you know, accepting them who they are, the trash and all. It really has helped me. The program is just a fabulous, fabulous program. If you've never gone to both kinds of meetings, I extremely recommend it. I will never forget one of the open AA meetings that I went to, and this guy just comes in and he just plops down in his chair and he crosses his arms and he has a really grouchy looking face, and I'm so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic and I'm pissed because I am. And it's like, oh yeah, he didn't go to the grocery store and buy it. He didn't go to the dollar store and pick it off the shelf and decide he was going to be an alcoholic. Nobody chooses it, you know, so you have to love him in spite of it. And one of the Al-Anon things that I really liked was the detachment. You know, one of the topics was just detachment. They said if they had cancer, would you love them then? You know, alcoholic is a disease, and it's a damn disease. But you love them in spite of it. And you do it as much as you do the best you can, and get through it. And God makes a way. Anyway, I'll just end with that. Thank you so much.
All right, Laura.